He simply didn't like to be pushed around. He certainly didn't like people like John Poindexter or even William Casey coming down to his villa and telling him what he should do or what he shouldn't do.
Then in 1986, the Iran-Contra scandal erupted. Noriega's primary contacts in the administration were now under intense scrutiny.
Oliver North was fired, Poindexter was forced to resign, and William Casey fell ill with a brain tumor. So all three of Noriega's major protectors were out of government, and that led quickly to a shift in U.S. policy.
Sentiments within Panama were turning against Noriega as well. For 3 years, Noriega worked with the DEA in a sting operation codenamed Operation Pisces. In 1987, with Noriega's assistance, authorities arrested hundreds of suspects and froze millions of dollars in Panama's banks, severely disrupting the money laundering business. The financial community was outraged, and Noriega's opponents mobilized against him. Back in Washington, Noriega's opponents lobbied and testified against him, accusing him of murder, corruption, and drug running. The U.S. media quickly turned it into a major story.
United States, but relations with Panama are under a new cloud tonight because of news reports
Senator
alleging...
Jesse Helms charged today that the military strongman of Panama, Manuel Noriega, is the #1 drug trafficker in the Americas. Helms said depending on how the situation with Noriega
reports from U.S. intelligence have also led to new investigations on Capitol Hill.
Faced with increased pressure, both in the U.S. and Panama, Noriega introduced a wave of brutal repression, attacking protesters in the streets and jailing hundreds of opponents. The Reagan administration now openly called for his removal.
We do want Noriega out of there and a return to a civilian democratic government.
But behind the scenes, the administration was secretly negotiating with Noriega, promising not to indict him on drug charges if he would cooperate with U.S. objectives in Central America. Gabrielle Gemma, director of the Independent Commission of Inquiry on the U.S. invasion of Panama, spoke to Noriega about his negotiations with the U.S.
General Noriega told us that there were a number of demands placed on him directly, both through Poindexter and other meetings, where the State Department pressured him to change the Panamanian government's policy on several issues. He said that by far the most pressing was a demand by the United States that Noriega and the Panamanian government allow the U.S. to expand their military presence in Panama and to renegotiate the treaties to allow them to keep control over the 14 bases, military bases, that presently exist in Panama.
Noriega refused to agree to the U.S. demands or to relinquish his power in Panama. In February 1988, 2 U.S. federal grand juries in Florida indicted Noriega, accusing him of drug trafficking, money laundering, and racketeering. It was the first time a foreign head of state had ever been indicted in the United States. The U.S. now undertook a systematic effort to overthrow Noriega. Economic sanctions were stepped up and additional troops were dispatched to Panama.
The United States tonight declared in effect that Panama's General Manuel Noriega is a threat to this country's national security.
Mr. Noriega, the drug-related indicted dictator of Panama. We want to bring him to justice, we want to get him out, and we want to restore democracy to Panama. And so when you read these outrageous charges by a drug-related indicted dictator, discount them. They are total lies.
Still unable to force Noriega from power, the United States turned its efforts to influencing the upcoming 1989 Panamanian national elections. The Bush administration, working through the CIA and the National Endowment for Democracy, funneled more than $10 million into the opposition's slate of candidates. Presidential candidate Guillermo Endara, a wealthy corporate lawyer educated in the United States, and his vice presidential running mates, Guillermo Billy Ford and Ricardo Arias Calderon.
If the same scenario that those elections occurred in had taken place in the United States, they would have been illegal. In the United States, accepting money from a foreign government for the purpose of influencing a domestic election is illegal.
Those elections were irregular from the beginning. How can you call it a fair election? The strategy was applied in Panama, they applied in Nicaragua, and they were applied to every government who disagree with the U.S. foreign policy. They use economical sanction to starve people, then to impose a vote on these people, because people vote to get bread when they're hungry. And I don't think that's democracy.
The elections were held, the counting of the votes began, it became clear that the PRD would lose the election. And at that point, and not for the first time in the history of Panama or many other countries in Central America, the military rulers halted the electoral process.
The country erupted in violence as ballot boxes were seized. The U.S.-supported candidates who had been leading in vote tallies were brutally beaten on the streets of Panama City in front of rolling TV cameras. The assailants were alleged to be Noriega's Dignity battalions, although none were ever identified. It was a photo opportunity that crystallized world public opinion against Noriega.
Good evening. The violence in Panama escalated sharply this evening when government goons attacked candidates opposed to General Manuel Noriega.
Were attacked and beaten up on the streets of Panama City. Guillermo Endara, and one of the
opposition presidential candidate, was beaten and injured during the day by backers of military strongmen.
Later, the presidential candidate Endara was released from the hospital. It has been confirmed that he was attacked by goons.
The following day, President Bush ordered 2,000 additional troops into Panama.
I will do what is necessary to protect the lives of American citizens, and we will not be intimidated by the bullying tactics, brutal though they may be, of the dictator Noriega.
After the election fiasco, the Panamanian National Assembly declared a state of emergency and appointed Noriega head of state. George Bush now openly encouraged the Panamanian military to revolt against Noriega.
But we'd love to see him get him out. We'd like to see him out of there.
With support and encouragement from the United States, a group of officers from the Panamanian Defense Forces, the PDF, began planning a military coup to overthrow Noriega. They secretly met several times with the U.S. Southern Command to coordinate support for the overthrow.
The role to be played by the United States Army was to block certain roads, make sure that certain airfields were not made available for use by elements loyal to or potentially loyal to General Noriega.
With these assurances, the insurgent troops launched the coup attempt. They quickly overpowered Noriega's guards, seized the PDF headquarters, and captured Noriega. But the Americans did not carry through on their promises. Forces loyal to Noriega were allowed to gain entrance and crush the rebellion, freeing General Noriega. President Bush later denied any U.S. involvement in the operation.
This was some American operation, and I can tell you that is not true. But I would repeat, in the hopes that it be conveyed instantly to Panama, we have no argument with the Panamanian Defense Forces. We have no argument with them. We've had good relations with the Panamanian Defense Forces.
But investigative journalist Doug Vaughn, who was in Panama during the failed coup attempt, disputes Bush's claims.
That the idea, at least on the American side, was to lead these coup plotters along, to seduce them into believing that they had